Recording in progress. So, hello everybody. Kind of start these in mid-conversation, but I was just talking to Joshua there about how a heaviness kind of descended upon me before we start talking, because I have a feeling we'll be talking about some interesting big topics. So this is Joshua Cameron, and we met last year, nearly a whole year ago, doing the Chronic Pain Summit.
Yeah.
And chronic pain is something I think both of us have in common. I'm currently actually trying an anti-inflammatory diet, and it seems to be working. So that's kind of cool. But I got in touch with Josh there a few weeks ago to say, I need to talk about who God is and what you
Mm,
think God is, and I need to do it with you. And I have no idea why. And then the heaviness is kind of validating that there's something here to talk about. So hello, Josh. Maybe introduce yourself to my crowd. I saw your data analyst. You got your foot in two different worlds because you're doing a
yeah.
lot of the coaching as well, mentoring, working with people in pain, as well as dipping into computer coding.
So my name is Joshua Cameron. I am, born and raised in Utah here, across the pond in the United States. Spent a few years in the, U.S. military. Had the privilege of serving with the British military as well when I was in Kosovo. As far as the last 3 years have been just as if some cosmic hand pulled me back on a slingshot and then just released me and just flying through just so much learning, so much just self-development. And a lot of that came from, you talk about the heaviness, a lot of that came from just a lot of chaos around my life. And part of that was, the pandemic, working in a pediatric hospital at the time, doing
Wow.
data analytics, helping all the tertiary clinics. That was quite tough because it was like I realized that the U.S. Healthcare system was pretty bad off, and by bad off I mean pretty corrupt and tied to the kind of pharmaceutical industrial complex, if you will. And then when I saw behind the scenes the COVID response, like, oh, this has nothing to do with patient care. This is all about taking care of bureaucrats, and that really bummed me out. Right? It kind of broke my heart because I saw a lot of honor and meaning and value in who I was, and here I am helping kids, and I'm helping
Yeah.
kids, right? And now with that, that then sent me on a little bit of a tailspin because I didn't really have a grounding element anymore. Later, I got separated, then divorced from my wife. When I moved out, I bought a condo where I was living above somebody, and this guy ended up being a tweaker who was shaking my floor like 80 decibels with his bass music, right? I literally had a decibel meter to prove. And, so while if that wasn't bad enough, if you can imagine the vulgarity of doing that to a combat veteran, right? Just boom, boom, boom.
Yeah.
Um, and so I couldn't get any help. And so, but it was what I needed. And the reason why it was what I needed is because I built all these walls around me. And so anytime that something would come to me that would try to scare me, or something that come to try to help me, right? Maybe a messenger, cosmic messenger from an ally. Well, I have all these ramparts and these, archers shooting arrows at them, right? Because I'm trying to protect myself. And what all this chaos did is it wrecked those walls, and it put big cracks and fissures
I
in them. And
see.
that
So you had the walls up before all of this happened.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so when those walls started tumbling down is when I really needed to seek solace in how do I how do I find order amidst all this chaos? And so I originally tuned into a podcast, a guy by the name of Jocko Willink, a former Navy SEAL commander. Well, he led me to Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson was secularizing the Bible. And at this point, I really saw myself as an atheist. And so I was like, okay, well, secular wisdom, this sounds safe. This sounds interesting. And as he broke down the secular wisdom in the Bible, I was like, wow, this is fascinating, right? For so long, I would take some of the most absurd things that I might hear on one side of the world or the country, and then find somebody else who says that they believe in God, and I would demand that they defend this obnoxious thing that I heard that wasn't even from them, it wasn't even from where they lived, it wasn't part of, their family, it wasn't a part of the ideology, and yet I'd still force them to defend it. And I'd sit with my arms folded, like, yeah, look at me, look how much smarter I am. And it took me a while to realize the absurdity of kind of that, mode of operating in the world.
Do you think you got that from listening to Jordan Peterson?
Well, so part of it, because a lot of what he talks about is really examining your deeply held beliefs. But I think the biggest thing there was, as I was listening to him secularize Genesis, it led me to a question. And I've learned that asking better questions gives you a better quality life.
Yeah.
And the question I asked myself was, is there room for God in my life? Not do I believe in God? Not
Mm.
do I, like the God that the LDS here in Utah are preaching or the Catholics are preaching, but just this God that I'm learning about with all this great secular wisdom, is there room for God in my life? And it took about maybe a little over a week, and I got a vision in my head of a podium. And I just knew, I just felt in my bones that by looking at that podium, it meant I was supposed to be addressing a congregation, specifically here in Utah, a Mormon church. But if I'm, identify as an atheist, am I just supposed to walk up to the bishop and say, "Hey, homie, time for you to get because I got a vision from heaven. I'm supposed to be addressing the congregation here." And took me a little bit. I spoke to some friends for a couple of weeks and then found out that there's first Sunday of every month, the LDS put on what's called the fast and testimonial meeting, which means that anybody, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter whether you're a member or not, anybody who's in the congregation can go up and address the congregation and share their testimonies. Like, anybody? Anybody. It's like, well, that seems like a cool loophole. And it's something I didn't know of.
Mm.
And yet just by following, this vision and authentically showing authentic curiosity,
Yes.
then led me to a breadcrumb, which led me to another breadcrumb, which led to this actually happening, which then led to me creating my highest ideal of goodness, of which I can conceive, which really came out to be, Gandalf. And, Gandalf was, Tolkien was heavily influenced by C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis
Mm.
was very much into, Christian mythology. And, maybe that's not the right word, mythology, but, big Christian. And so Gandalf was effectively Jesus of Middle Earth. This is why he also goes through the death and, rebirth,
Okay.
scene. It's also why he was able to see what nobody else could see. The true value were, the hobbits. Everyone else discounted. Look at these little children people, right? They're not building grand castles. They're not building grand armies. They're not building, great commerce. But what Gandalf saw was that they had more love in their hearts than anybody else in the world. And that's why he hung out with them, and smoked a lot of weed, right? Long bottom leaf. And 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 so now that was one of the beautiful things about Gandalf is that he saw that which was most important, is because without these people that everyone else discounted and already wrote off, well, Middle Earth would have burned.
Mm. That's, yeah, interesting way
Yeah.
of looking at it. Yeah. So you summoned Gandalf as the wizard archetype to inspire you, or go back to that. How did that connect in with where you were at the time?
So I didn't really know much about archetypes. I started learning a little bit more about Carl Jung and some of the archetypes a little bit by listening to JP. But then I by following this path is when I found true in my life the idea that when the student is ready, the master will appear. And out of nowhere, I there's YouTube video comes up of this British chap by the name of Peter Sage. You ever heard of him?
Mm.
So he, serial entrepreneur, and he's talking about procrastination and how it has nothing to do with intelligence, and what the root cause actually is. And it was like a 3-minute video, and I was already hooked. Like, what the hell? This guy like just unzipped all my outer barriers, right? This facade that I've been aiming at the world. And so I looked up more information, and somebody contacted me and said, "Well, hey, why don't you go ahead and check out this 1 hour webinar?" which I did. Then they gave me a call afterwards and said, okay, well, it sounds like you really like this. Why don't you go ahead and check out this other 1 hour webinar? It's like, what the hell, man? Like I've never had somebody give me a call and say, hey, why don't you just check out 2 hours of webinars, and then we'll go ahead and get you to deposit a substantial sum of money. But
Yeah.
sure enough, there I was, and that took me through a deep dive into neuroscience, neuropsychology, quantum mechanics, and quantum physics from the eyes of an actual, scientist and physicist.
Hmm.
His mentor in that realm is Tom Campbell, who was a former NASA engineer who later went on to work for the Monroe Institute and actually are the ones who created binaural beats, if you're familiar with binaural beats.
Okay. Hmm.
And so it was fascinating to hear somebody who actually conducted their own double slit experiment talk about the double slit experiment rather than, not that I necessarily have anything against, people who have, wisdom to share, say like Deepak Chopra, but it's different hearing Deepak Chopra talk about the double slit experiment versus somebody who's a legit scientist who actually held the scientific experiments in their laboratory talk about the double slit experiment.
So for
And
people who are listening who don't know what that is, I'm assuming it's the one where a particle changes to a wave when you're looking at it. The
yeah, yeah,
observer changes the essence of what it is that's going on.
yep, exactly. In a nutshell, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So that had a big impact on, did it change your way of thinking?
Yes, part of that training, so it was 6 months long. Um, More than that, though, it was about the understanding that, our environment trumps our willpower every time over time. And a great analogy is that if you and I are walking around, a lovely, Irish, cliff face, and then I slip and I'm holding on for dear life, where you come back next Tuesday, I ain't going to be there. It doesn't matter how much I want to hold on. I just ain't going to be there. Right. And so our environment, molds us and it shapes us. And that's actually by design. Right. So we're meant to be programmable by design. Right. The people that we're around, well, they're our tribe. Right. And we want to obviously make sure that we fit in with our tribe. When we were hunter gatherers, if we got ostracized, well, that was death. So obviously we wanted to have some coherent component, within us that could then be informed to say, hey, am I, working with the construct or against the construct? And
Okay, so
obviously,
I'm going to stop there because I want to go back to the main points of this because you are a computer programmer and you're talking about being programmable and talking about the impact that the environment has on us is inevitable impact. And you mentioned the guy that you lived above and how his music had an impact on you.
mhm,
And you mentioned going to Kosovo and there was an impact of travel and seeing what you saw there.
mhm.
But then you also talk about how a video just showed up on your YouTube and led you to another one and led you to another one. And then you had a webinar and then you met this guy and then you met that guy. Do you think that your environment is being programmed to program you, or you are the one that's programming the environment?
I think in a manner of speaking, it's kind of like the Ouroboros. Where's the mouth and where's the tail?
Mm,
Right. And the old chicken and the egg. I think my, so the way Tom Campbell talks about is that, if we think of ourselves right now, um in, the universe that we're in, physics is now proving that it's an information based universe, which means that which is effectively what a simulation is it's information based. So if you were to take an old like Sims video game where you're creating a virtual environment where, here's this person that's going around their business in their house, going to work, whatever. Well, they have their own individual consciousness. Well, outside of that is us, the player, and the player is the larger consciousness system. Well, if we think of the universal energy field, right, that which is everywhere, that which is omnipresent, that which, people ascribe to God, well, God would be the larger consciousness system, and we'd be the individual participants in this simulation of basically experiencing what it is to be God with limitations. Because if God is omnipresent, omniscient, omnipowerful, well, the one thing God doesn't have is limitations. And just like if we are around a table playing a board game with our kids, we get so sucked into it and it's a heck of a lot of fun. And because there's limitations, we're all held to the same standards, we're all held to the same rules. But just like in the Matrix, what Neo, so famously told, or sorry, what Morpheus so famously told Neo is that some rules can be bent and others can be broken. And I think that in some cases, whether different energy fields, maybe you'll call them angels, maybe you'll call them higher beings, maybe you'll call them extraterrestrials. I don't really care what label you put on them, but there is a sense that whatever our conscious awareness is, our soul, right, our individual piece or spark of that God light, um, can tap into those other energy fields and then kind of drop it down to materialize into our world as a YouTube video or as a great
Mhm.
mentor. And
We
in
are
order
then
to
throwing breadcrumbs for ourselves.
exactly, exactly,
Yeah. So I'm kind of looking into simulation theory at the moment, so it's really interesting that you brought it up. The conversation, the intricacies just tripled there in that
yeah,
in there. So wow. So we go back to you then making a testimonial in a congregation.
yeah.
Did that happen?
Yes. So I've done it now about 16 or 17 times. And the thing is while I like I feel that the congregation gets a lot out of it. Like in fact, I even spent I think it was about 3 months or so. It was in 2021. They being the LDS Church put on a course for self-reliance because people are going through the COVID response, lockdowns, and like what the hell do I do, and not sure how to respond. So I started going to their class again. I'm literally the only non-member there, right? And they had a course book, they had a facilitator, and the facilitator was expected to go line by line through the course book and no deviation whatsoever. But like, well, in comes Joshua. Like I mean, just following rules for the sake of following rules is not really my MO. And so I'd get people off subject. I get them sharing from their deepest parts of who they are, and that's when they started sharing with me just how much they mourn their faith. And they made it like a kind of a dark joke about it, how they and the Catholics seem to mourn their faith the most. In fact, it's
Can you
almost a
explain what you
competition.
mean by that?
That they set a complete set of rules for themselves that are almost completely impossible to attain.
Okay.
That in the face of disaster, they need to be happy and pretend like they're not actually feeling what they're feeling, and then instead just put a smile on their face. Um, Whereas that's different than surrendering to something higher and allowing that something higher, right? Again, whether that's God, Jesus, Krishna, Buddha, whatever, and have them take those burdens, have them alchemize the lead weights pulling us down into golden plates that then serve us.
Well, that's kind of forgetting that source energy or God or divine spark actually has a will and intention as well. When I go back to the idea that you had of a family playing a board game on the table in the kitchen, and they
Hmm.
all have little pieces moving around, and that board game has a limitation and the rules.
Yeah.
But this is what I do with my family. When we play a board game, and I think this is really indicative then of who I am and who my kids are growing up to be. And if we don't like the rules of the game, we stop playing the game and we decide on different rules. And then we
Nice.
come back to the game and we play the same game with the same pieces and the same card, but we play it in the way that we like better. And we have more fun that way.
Well, and I love that you said that because in the elite mentorship forum training that I got with Peter Sage, right, what we do is we actually go through and we list out our values. And then when we list out our values, say one of our values is to feel loved. Well, what are the rules around that we've created for ourselves to feel loved? Oh, well, I have to have people agree with me all the time. Okay, well, that's near impossible then for me to feel loved.
Yeah.
If people have to agree with me all the time, well, I'm never going to feel loved. And again, this is part of why people, mourn their faith because they feel like they need to always have some level of agreement. And in the exact same way, as we understand these rules and this tangled, ball of, mess, well, we can start to untangle that and then rewrite the rules that we want in order to actually get the feeling that we want, in order to live the life that we want and play the game that we want in the exact same way that you just described. Hey, these rules don't work for this. Let's work out better rules.
I think even going back to values, because in one of the books that I've written, it's called Heal Your Inner Wounds,
Mm,
where you're just bumbling along in life, living to set values that you've never actually questioned as an individual. And
Yes.
so I give exercises to people in the book to say, okay, stop right there. What are my values? And then what is a value? Some people don't even know what a value is. And so here's a
Mm,
huge list of values and where do you feel and where do you sit with that? And do you really then believe that value? Like you say, I need
mm,
someone to agree with me and then I feel love. It's like, well, where did that come from? Oh, well, that came from my parents.
yep.
Because when my mom agreed with my dad, then he was quiet and I had an easier life. You
Bingo. Yep.
know?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, and then from a young age, right, we see our parents effectively as God, as the God unit, the God representation in our lives. And then even more than that, from the age of 0 to 7, our brain is in a theta brainwave state, right? The exact same brainwave state as when we're dreaming. And when
Yeah.
we're dreaming, right, we don't have a dream and be like, well, wait a minute, that's Uncle Fred. He died 5 years ago, right? What are you doing here? Oh, this must be a dream. No, we just accept it because the critical part of our brain, right, the frontal cortex, is it's not working. It's deactivated. It's turned off. And so kids don't have that ability at that age. So they just like a sponge, right? They're being programmed. And they're being programmed saying, hey, this is the environment that you're expected to excel in and to thrive in and to grow up in. And then once they hit 7, it's like, okay, go. Right now they're running all the automated programs and they're figuring out their way on how to have those programs fit and mold themselves into the cybernetic organism, right? That will best fit that environment.
And then you say that when you're small, your children are, as a child, your parents are gods.
Hmm.
And to just really get the sense of, well, I remember how I felt once one or both of them was in the house, I knew I'd be okay.
Mm,
And I don't know why I thought I wasn't okay without them in the house. And as an aside, all these fairy tales that start with the parents being killed. I think there's
yeah.
a whole bunch of Roald Dahl books where the first thing that happens is the parents are killed. But that's beside the point. What happens then as you grow up? So afterwards in the teenage years, you just want to fit in with your peers, and then you become the adult, and the idea is that you step into the role of being responsible for yourself. And here's the thing that I think is where many people go wrong, is they look to replace that godlike figure of their mom and the dad and hand it to the health system, or they hand it to the police, or they hand it to the government, or they
Mm,
hand it to the other authority or to the church without questioning their values. And then you go and you live your life to all these rules and you never question the rules because you feel safe when you're contained by those rules of the game. And I think then when COVID comes along and all of these rules are changing, the difference between the people that started questioning the rules and the people that just went along with the rules. I'm still trying to figure it out. And I was thinking, well, maybe people who questioned the rules had a stronger faith and belief in themselves, or were more responsible in their own lives and able to say, well, hang on a minute, this is appropriate and this isn't appropriate, or people who questioned their values. But that's kind of going off topic a little bit, but it's still all connected. When you go back to a church who is starting to question their own rules, that's really kind of cool in a way. But also, I'm wondering, was the overarching church becoming concerned about that?
so, are you talking about like in my experience
Yeah, in your experience.
so there definitely seemed to be people who were very comfortable with the rote routine expected, diatribe, the exact same thing
My
that's
dad's in
said.
the house, so you're going to
And
be
yeah.
okay.
And so they seem to be, I don't know if alarmed is the right word, but they definitely seem to be a little bit more put out than those who were more open-minded, totally accepted my message. And they would come in, they were just excited. Man, brother, I really love the way that you shared this. Wow, what a wonderful testimony. I really appreciate you sharing that. And this is people, so you got the bishop, and then right under him are the first and second counselor. And so
Mm.
I had the second and first counselor come up to me all the time, just chatting me up and talking about my inspiration and where I got my inspiration for these testimonials. And so I certainly was reaching in and helping share my light and my love and my truth. Now it's up to them to say, hey, my dogma is not as powerful as true light and love, right? Because if you flip dogma around, well, then you have M God, right? AMGOD instead of DOGMA.
Okay, right.
And, and if we all are, pieces, sparks of that God light, well, then we all are by definition, gods. In fact, Jesus even said, is it not written in your laws that ye are gods? And that's, that he said that right after he said, that he told everyone, even the least amongst you can do these and greater things. Is it not written in your laws that ye are gods? And, but we forget that. And the church is like, no, 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 Abby, didn't you know only Jesus is the true Son of God? Like, who are you, Abby? Right. And so it's, the church is there to take our power, so we give it away. And like you said, with the kind of the rules that church, they create, well, next thing we know, well, we're just a tiger on a pedestal jumping through a flaming ring. And we don't realize that we're just jumping through this circus, going through all these hoops, this little fanfare
Mm.
for the powers that be just
And
watching.
they're
Like,
all
hey, look,
clapping you when you do it, and then you're really
yeah,
proud of yourself because you did it and you don't even know why you did it in the first place.
yes, exactly. Because we all see, we all seek love. In fact, the scariest thing for probably universally for everyone is the idea of not getting love from those that we do love.
Yeah.
And that stems, I think, from the fact that God, right, universal, the larger consciousness, system is all about a lower entropy state, right? Entropy is chaos. Entropy is where the rules break down, right? When we die, well, that's entropy. Why? Well, the rules that held us together and kept us alive are breaking down. And now what held us together is being separated. We're now turning back into soil, right? From whence we came, from soil. And,
Well, not
so
the
the large,
consciousness necessarily, maybe the body, but not the consciousness.
well, yes, yes. So the body, yeah, good point. And I'm glad you brought that out. The body is a vessel, right, for the soul. And so but the body is the means from which we can actually play the game. Because without the body, we don't have the limitations. Without the body, we can't actually be players on that board game to
Okay, but
decide whether we
I'm
like the
working
rules.
with another idea that's kind of freaking me out, but
Yeah.
what if your body is your playing piece in this game and your assumption is that when we're not in the body, we're not in the game, but we're actually in a different game and it still is a game.
So I like that idea. And as I understand, there are, and I don't know that I have any way to prove this, but as I
Yeah.
understand, there are different universes, right? So there's this material universe, this 3D universe, and then there's the astral realm, and then beyond that, there's the subtle realm, and then beyond that even, I guess is something even greater and grander. And there are traps in each one of those to
Yes.
get us to think like, oh, this is truly where it all is. Oh, I was waiting to get to this astral realm. Well, beyond that is another realm. Oh, I was just waiting to get to this subtle realm. Well, beyond that's even another realm. And so I think that you're right, and you're right on there. And when it comes to God, and so I have a book now that's in production, and will be published here in the next couple of weeks. In fact, probably by the time that this goes live, and it's called Finding God Within the Abyss. And
Mhm.
because in all that shaking, right, as that earthquake is going on and all those walls, well, what I didn't realize is I had a cracked foundation. And so I didn't realize that having a cracked foundation, having the walls crumble and the building itself crumble was doing me a favor. Because the worst thing that could happen to me is be on the top floor when that thing crumbles.
Yeah.
And so I felt like my world was falling apart. And I wanted to hold on. And to your question about, was it people who had, better, maybe I can't remember exactly the way you put it, but better a sense of awareness or belief in themselves that,
Mm.
when the COVID response happened. I think it's people who, when those cracks started showing up and those walls started falling over, I think some part of them, same way that I did, some part of them surrendered to something. And to me, it was surrendering to a question: is there room for God in my life? And since I asked that question with true sincerity, well, it opened a portal for God, for the universal energy field, for my soul to say, well, Eureka. All right, buddy, this is what we were waiting for.
Well,
And then
that's
it
a
can start.
famous line, isn't it? The cracks are
Yeah,
where the light gets in. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And not just that, but sunlight is the greatest disinfectant. And how often do we hide our shadow and that which we don't like from, about ourselves that others trigger in us? We just force into our shadow as if it doesn't exist, never to see the light of day. And as soon as somebody triggers us, it roars up at Abby, you're the one who did it. I wouldn't be mad if you didn't say that thing that you said, right? And
I do
yeah.
get that a lot. I'm going to go back to the part where you said that you were an atheist. And now I'm
Mhm.
going to forward to the part where you said you're going into these church groups and you're giving testimonial and you're
Mhm.
lecturing them. How does that feel to you? Do you feel like you needed to convert to a religion? Have you converted to a religion?
That's such a beautiful question. No, I feel zero compulsion to convert to a religion because Jesus never created a religion. People created a religion around him in order to control others. And I
Mm.
think and he even said, where two or more are assembled, right? There I'll be. And so really it's just a matter of tapping into that, not just love, but also like the highest levels of love, but also the highest levels of truth, right? Because love can often be, we can often, I think, confuse pity for love.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
I feel so bad for that person, and so let me go ahead and the lessons that they're there to learn, let me just go ahead and do that for them. It'll be faster if I just do this for my kid, rather than let them learn. And that we often see that as love rather than allowing ourselves to be patient in that sense of self-suffering as we watch and see them learn. And the great healing master Ed Stracher, who taught me how to heal, I look at him a lot like I don't know if you ever saw the Quentin Tarantino movies, Kill Bill.
Mm.
So the second Kill Bill had Pai Mei, right? This amazing, martial arts, master who was training Uma Thurman, and he was brutal. Now Ed wasn't quite as brutal as Pai Mei was, but the thing is, Pai Mei wasn't brutal just to be brutal. He was brutal just so he could trigger that part of your ego so it would rise up and he could snap it down and say, you are not as good as you think you are. You need to be humble so you can learn. And the second that she started showing her true prowess and how good she actually was, you saw it, you saw the pride in his face. It's like, there it is. That's who I was waiting to come out.
It's funny. I just watched The Karate Kid on the other night with my
Nice.
kids.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing, wax on, wax off.
Yep.
So wow. So where are you going with all of this? You've written a book, you say. You're
Yep.
finishing up a book.
Yep. So it's in production right now. And I this, I learned how to heal. And the type of healing I do is healing the soul. Because again, if the body's the container for the soul, well, then the soul will then rejuvenate the body. And what happens is fear, COVID, the different poisons that we may ingest through our food, different poisons we may ingest through pharmaceuticals. Well, what happens is they start to convince us that this is all there is. And if we're convinced that this is all there is, well, it starts draining the soul. It starts programming us into thinking in disempowering ways that then
Mm,
disconnects us from the power of our soul.
yeah.
And so I joined the self-realization fellowship that Paramahansa Yogananda started. And as I was learning, with in training, with Ed, right, my Pai Mei, um, he showed us how to connect to different energy fields or different souls, right? Because souls are eternal. And he mentioned Baba Ji and mentioned Paramahansa Yogananda. I was like, Yogananda, who's this guy? Somebody who died like a couple thousand years ago? I was like, no, he died in the 50s. Like, oh, okay, well, that's strange. And then eventually, as so I had a healing practice working with a lot of clients, people from around the world, and then my foundation shook again because what I found was I I don't want to be too harsh on myself, but I found that in my space to let go of my ego to where um I could then allow that true love, that truth, that light in. Well, then I was at that place that, haha, I made it. Look at me, I'm at the top of the mountain. It's like, yeah, fool, you ain't at the top of the mountain, right? Anytime that we get to a top, there's always a higher peak. And so what it did was it humbled me, but it humbled me in such a way that it actually put me in a better place. I'm in a, my business is not running right now, but it should be back up in the next few months. So my website's down right now, but then it got me to a place where I could actually have an authentic path to
Yes.
God. So no longer am I just an atheist speaking to a congregation of believers or believers, right? They follow, dogma,
Rule followers.
right? Well, and big reason why I wore this hat, why I wear this hat is I got it from a fantasy, a series of fantasy novels, right? A 5 books series called the Clare Quintet, put on by R.A. Salvatore. And the main character is Catterley Bonadus, and this man who grew up in a monastery, and everyone in the monastery, all the monks, all the nuns, well, they succumbed to the profanity of bureaucracy, and there
Mm.
was nothing sacred left about, even though they're worshiping a holy God, there was nothing there of worship. There was no sacred in what they
That
did.
sounds like your hospital.
Yes, exactly. The hospital sounds like any dogma that you go into. I mean, go to Catholic Mass and point out where's the sacred, right? When they seem to be like there's zero inflection, there's no excitement, and where's the sacred? Because the sacred should wake you up. It should make you want to be like, holy shit, I'm a believer. Yes, right. And it doesn't necessarily need to, your reaction doesn't need to be my reaction. Um, but there's something that should bring you alive, right? The sacred should bring you alive. And the bureaucracy is a matter of entropy, where the beautiful, the beautiful flower that is only so beautiful because it took its insides and showed it on the outside, took that light from within, right?
Mm.
Jesus said the kingdom of heaven is within. So it took that kingdom of heaven and shown it, took it from the inside out, but then the entropy, the bureaucracy is all those petals falling to the ground. Now, the beauty with that though is that even with that entropy, even with, whether it be, business falling apart, whether it be, we feel like our lives might be falling apart. Well, what happens when all those, all that, matter falls on the ground? Well, it decays. And when it decays, well, it then feeds the root structure to allow the plant itself to become stronger and allows us to learn from our mistakes. And so now I'm no longer just an outsider looking in the sense of an atheist looking at people who claim that they believe in God. I'm now somebody who has a true walk with God because I dared to believe and follow a vision rather than say, oh, I must be a crazy person. Right. And so, right, I dared to believe. And that's really what my book is about is a lot of questions to ask yourself to get you to a path where you can dare to believe, ask yourself a question, and just allow those breadcrumbs to start falling, and then just go and follow those breadcrumbs.
That sounds like a great title. What's your book title?
So it's Finding God Within the Abyss.
Finding God Within It. Subtitle, Dare to Believe. Do you dare to believe?
Oh, that's a good one. That's a good one. And so since it's still in production, that might be
You
better
still
because right
have
now the
time.
the subtitle I've been
That's
kicking
what's going to
around.
catch them.
Yeah, Dare to Believe. Oh,
Wow.
I
So
like
what
that.
would you call yourself then if you're no longer an atheist?
Um, I'm a follower of God.
Follower of
You know,
God.
yeah, I don't necessarily need, I don't feel the need to really adopt a label.
Good. I like that
And
answer.
yeah, and
Call
so
yourself Joshua Cameron.
yeah, there you go, right? And then, and even with that, what's funny too is, I went by Josh for a long time. And, because, as a young kid, as I was growing up, my mom would be like, hey, you should go by Josh because it sounds more adult. And Joshua sounds more like a child. Now, there are great books written about, the name's Joshua. In fact, Yeshua, right? It comes, Joshua comes from Yeshua. And, so there's great people throughout history that have the name Joshua. Well, the number 86 has followed me throughout my life. And Joshua numerically, right? Josh has the numerological value of 6. Michael, my middle name, same 6. Cameron, same 6. Well, switching it to
666.
I know, right? And so
Interesting.
I was walking in darkness as well. But when I changed to Joshua, because I felt as I was going through this journey, as I was finding the sacred, Joshua just seemed so much more compelling and right for me. Well, Josh has the numerological, or Joshua has the numerological value of 2. And well, then Michael, we already established is 6. Then 2 plus 6 is 8 with another 6 at the end.
Mm.
And it's like, oh, it's almost like this teaser as I'm seeing 86 come throughout my life all the time. It was waiting for me to just reach out and grasp, kind of my true power that I can define myself rather than be defined by others. In the same way that, that you mentioned, as far as the values that we have are so often given to us by our pastor, our priest, our parents, and rare is the person that actually goes and does a deep dive into their value set.
Yeah. I think also because people who are strong in what they believe in are becoming more and more cannon fodder, bait for it being attacked, seeing it all the time. And what's great though is that it's not that we are finding each other, but that more people are accepting the fact that more opinions exist out there than mainstream opinions. And
Yeah.
we're seeing a tide change,
Yeah.
which
Well,
is
and then,
cool.
I like to call them legacy opinions because it's not mainstream. It
Legacy.
used to be mainstream,
Yeah.
right? But because it's legacy media is commonly referred to as mainstream media, but they're not mainstream
I
anymore.
kind of call them lamestream. I think
Yeah,
that's a
yeah,
Ego Talks thing.
yeah, yeah.
But
I
I'm
like that.
thinking then what we're doing as a collective, as a frequency, is we're gathering like frequency with like, and there's a separating out. So it's still like with like, but we're starting to create a simulation around ourselves
Hmm.
that works for us. We're going to rewrite the rules and we get to choose, do we want this environment or that environment? Because I'm thinking at this point in time that you're literally giving your life force energy to something that's stuck in a frequency that will just consume it because that's what it was designed to do. Whereas you
Hmm.
can pull yourself out of it, become the programmer of your own environment. I'm starting to think of like, the movie Inception,
Yeah,
where they went into somebody's dream. So if the dream is a simulation and you're inside the dream, then they interviewed someone to become the architect of the dream. And I'm beginning to think that we are architects of our own dream at some level. That's kind of the godlike qualities of us creating the environment that creates us to create the environment that creates us. So it's maybe a pinnacle point in our evolution where there has to be a split because the spectrum of differences of the frequency that are present at the moment is too far to be able to be in balance or comfortable. So it's possible that you chose the higher frequency timeline in other different, put it into a different way. And so you went through all of that pain of growth, of letting go, being hit by lightning, having your tower card in the tarot, everything is blasted
yep,
to make the room for God to come in.
yes,
Like God could be woven into the fabric of your existence from here on in. And
yeah.
it's beautiful.
Well, and then, with what you just shared, as far as, that we are making our own reality. Well, there are famous scientists that would agree with you. One, particular, his name is Maxwell Planck, known as Max Planck, who created Planck time. But he said that consciousness is primary. And doesn't that kind of make sense that consciousness is primary and that consciousness shapes our environment when we go back to the double slit experiment?
Well, we go
And
back
because,
to the Kabbalion, which is the book from which all wizards would draw their rules from, because there are rules to the game, and that is
yes,
the universe is mind. And that's
yes,
really, if you only ever learn one rule, that's the one to learn. So
yeah,
mind being consciousness.
yeah. The all is mind, the universe is mental. And if we
Yes.
understand that, well, then the mental universe is that simulation.
So is that satisfactory though? Or is that another conversation? I think feeling the God spark coming through puts colors into everything, makes everything more vibrant, more alive, more beautiful. But we still have a lot to discover and learn.
Yes. Um, as far as is that satisfactory, right? That's up for, everyone to discover for themselves, right? What do they find satisfying or satisfactory. And, if we look at being here in this body full of limitations, it's not all that different than looking at ourselves, say, at a gym, right? I go to the gym, I get a great workout. Well, I feel really proud of myself, especially if I didn't want to go there in the first place. And then
Or
if
if
I
you're a
keep,
tiger and you fly through a fire loop and
yeah, there
everyone
you go.
claps you,
Yeah.
you feel really great about yourself too.
You do.
But it's your
Yes.
choice.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. It's your choice. Do I follow the crowd that is applauding me for something that ultimately is leading to my doom? And I may not realize it, but there I am sitting with a dunce hat going, hey, right? Or am I going to do something that's hard, something that's difficult, something that is for myself, for my own growth,
Mm,
for my own realization, and my own accountability, right? And then, with that, allow what comes to come. And instead of saying, oh, this is not what I expected, this must be bad, say, this is not what I expected, this must be what I need. What might this be protecting me from?
yeah,
Right? Because if
interesting.
if the level of awareness we have is happiness comes from being that tiger jumping through that loop, and then the circus tent burns down, well, it seems like maybe there might be a favor in there for us that no longer do we need to perform for a bunch of people that aren't not going to lead to our salvation.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of dunce hats, you never finished your story about why you're wearing your hat.
Oh, okay. I'm glad you brought that back. Oh man, is this a dunce hat? Oh, sad.
No, you
Um,
didn't.
okay.
I didn't
Uh,
say that.
so so Catterley Bonadus. So here he is, he's in this monastery, and everyone around him, all the monks, all the nuns, are just pure bureaucrats. And they go point A, point B, point C, point D, and he would go from point A to point C, not to help others see a better way, but just to thumb his nose at authority because of kind of the disdain that he has inside. He just can't help it. He can't help it but thumb his nose. And it's like, oh my God, story of my life. And well, then great evil befalls this monastery, right? These evil priests come and they enact this chaos spell that then has everyone effectively, wreaking havoc upon everyone else within there. But he happened to be gone. He was not in the monastery at the time. But when he came back, there was something about the way that he was living, the fact that he left room for the sacred that doesn't follow rules just for the sake of following rules, the sacred that's not rigid, right? Because the Tao Te Ching has this idea that when man is born, he's soft and supple. When a plant is born, it's soft and pliable. When dies, he's stiff and rigid. When a plant dies, it's dry and brittle. Therefore, those who are soft and flexible are disciples of life, and those who are stiff and rigid are disciples of death. And all these bureaucrats were disciples of death. They may not have realized it. Catterley is a disciple of life. He may not have realized it, but it's the fact that he was a disciple of life that this holy God could actually reach in and inspire him and give him breadcrumbs for him to follow, to assemble the supporters that he needed in order to not just defeat this evil, but then step into something better and step into something higher and step into something, more than, he was. Not just somebody who thumbs his nose at authority, but somebody who does that same thing, that bends rules, that leapfrogs, past boundaries, but instead just a thumb nose at authority to show others a better way. And eventually he started wearing a hat much like this. And so this hat is a reminder for me when I wear it daily. It's a reminder that I can choose to seek the divine, or I can choose or the sacred, or choose to seek the profane. And it's up to me, right? I choose. Nobody else chooses for me. If somebody offends me, it's because I gave them permission to offend me. Does that make sense?
It does. It's worth taking a minute to sit with. Or that you have a trigger that you haven't healed because you chose not to heal it. And then if they push you in that part of you that's triggered, that's because you didn't heal that trigger.
Yep. Well, it also just like um a little toy that when you press a button it pops out, right? When it pops out is a way for it to say, hey, look at me, this is a place where I can be mind controlled. Because as soon as that happens and they press that button that leads to a wound, almost always, right? If it's part of our shadow, almost always we're going to have an emotional reaction to it. And you cannot
Mm,
have a rational conversation with an emotional reaction.
no.
And if you're having an emotional reaction, well, now it's your fault, Abby. How dare you give me this emotional reaction? How dare
Okay.
you? And but if we take the time to be like, oh, wait a minute, only I have the ability to respond accordingly. Only I have the sovereignty to make myself mad or sad or happy or fulfilled. And so if that happened, they gave me a gift. I may not have realized it was a gift, but they poked me just to show that there was a wound I've been hiding even from myself. And until I heal that, anyone can come and poke that wound and mind control me into that emotional state.
It takes somebody very brave to own that and become responsible for that. And that's what we need now is we need more people like that to step up and say, okay, I recognize this in myself and I don't like it and I want to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that was a fabulous conversation to have with you. Do you want to leave people with a thought around God if people were thinking, where do they start? How do they start making space?
Um, so again, if any part of this has resonated with you, start with that question. Is there room for God in my life? Not, do I believe in God? Because if we start off with, do I believe in God? Well, then ultimately we're likely going to start from a frame that somebody else gave us of what God is, of who God is. But if we say, is there room for God in my life? That gives God permission to show us who God is and allows him to take up space in that room. And then, little things too, like my dad is works with a lot of clay. And so the holy God that Catterley, worshiped, his name is Denier. So he's got these symbols. And so I had him make that on this cup. So it's an eyeball with a candle on it. And so I surround myself with symbolism that just reminds me of things that I see as holy. It reminds me of things that I see as sacred. And the more that we can stick to our sacred nature and sacred space, and if somebody's mad and tries to pull us off that and pull us into the profane, the more that we stick to that sacred space. Well, again, the Tao Te Ching says that um, the unmoved is the source of all movement.
Mm,
The unmoved is the source of all movement. So they're trying to pull you, but if you're a magnet and they're trying to pull you and you're unmoved, well, then by nature that they're going to pull themselves towards you. And they're gonna
interesting.
that profanity is gonna actually start alchemizing into the sacred.
That's why people get angry when truthful frequency people come in the room before they even open their mouth.
Yeah.
You're showing me all the work I never did on myself, and it's really annoying me.
How dare you, Abby? Right?
How dare you do your work and then show me how clean your energy field is compared
Yeah.
to mine? So yeah, by the time this comes out, your book should be available. So you'll send me the links. I'll put them below, put
Yeah,
them in
we'll do.
the podcast as well, and we'll keep in touch. And we'll talk again soon.
Oh,
Thank
I'd
you
love
for
love
your
it. Yeah.
time.
Well, as always, you're brilliant. I really enjoy the energy that you bring. I love the space that you hold, and I'm looking forward to see that next stage for you as well. And keep on being awesome. Keep on holding space for the sacred, and share that light.
Bye, everybody.